You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 2 of Ethnocynology, my new YouTube series and podcast on the Archaeology Podcast Network. My name is David Howe. I run Ethnocynology on Instagram. Actually, I should say I'm David Ian Howe. David Howe is some football player and a criminal. I'm David Ian Howe. You can Google that, and it won't bring you up to that other guy. Anyway, so last episode was kind of a discombobulated mess of me just talking out of my ass. This episode will be the same, but a little more structured. So I'm on Instagram Live here. If people have questions about dogs, shoot them in the chat, and I will answer them towards the end. It's only a half hour long. So last time I talked about what is ethnocynology and how I became an archaeologist and anthropologist. To sum it up, ethnocynology is like ethno meaning people, cyno meaning dog in Greek. So ethnocynology, study of dogs and people. So the study of dogs in human cultural contexts. And the word ethnocynology is technically called a neologism. Neologism. We'll go with neologism by Brian Cummings, if you look up the Wikipedia page. And I reached out to him, and he was like ecstatic that somebody was like picking it up. Because I thought about ethnolupinology, ethnokinetopology, and then I found ethnocynology, and technically that would be the right term because it's both the Greek words. You're not mixing Greek and Latin. So ethnocynology is it. And he was kind of ecstatic, and he wrote a book called Our Debt to the Dog. I own it. I read through it. Pretty good. He's the guy who coined it, but he was like totally cool with me, like using it as a brand and like whatever, because it's, you know, it's not, he doesn't own it. It's just the Greek word for what a study of something is. And ology, it's like jitsu or like ninjutsu, jujitsu in Japanese is like, I think it means extension of the hand or something like that. But like in the same term, like ology in Greek is like study of. So like extension of that. So that was irrelevant to say, but I just always found that interesting that those are similar. But anything with ology is like the study of. So ethnocynology, ethno, study of people and dogs. Yeah, and last episode, in the discombobulated fashion, I tried to explain how I got into this, which was I always liked the clashing of cultures, you know, with the Spanish arriving in the Americas, the French, the English. I always liked military stuff or like weaponry. I always liked that stuff. So when I took an anthro class and found stone tools, hunter-gatherer, like ecology, how hunter-gatherers operate, hunter-gatherer warfare, stone technology versus, you know, Iron Age technology or Gunpowder Age technology, found that interesting. But I always liked dogs, and I didn't get into this last time, but my aunt growing up was a veterinarian on Long Island, and she always had like many different dogs. Some she fostered that she was taking care of at the vet place. Some she like were her own dogs. Some she just like found. There was also, I got to see a lion cub when I was a kid because she had one. Someone just dropped it off at the vet place and was like, take care of this. So I saw a lion cub as a kid. Iguanas. We had a kinkajou, which is not a Pikachu and not a chew that has, I'm not going to say that one. It is like a jungle creature. That's all I can describe it as. And it escaped the cage, crawled around the house and bit my uncle's ear, like clean, not off, but like took a big chunk out. He had to get stitches. So they no longer had the kinkajou. Regardless, always had many dogs. And we had our own family dog, which my aunt, you know, was brought to my aunt's practice. Her name was Maggie. She was a beagle and a cocker spaniel. Very cute little dog, fat, kind of dumb, but half beagle. So she was very loud, but very sweet. And that was like my childhood dog. And then we had Athena when I was older, when I got into college. Maggie got put down when I was in high school. It was the day 300 came out because my dad and I like bawled our eyes out watching 300, putting the dog down. And then we were like, let's go watch 300, like just the 180, which was pretty cool. I remember that day very vividly. And I'm sure most people remember the days when you put your dog down, like what you're doing kind of stuff, because it's significant. It's like losing a person. Chemically, it is. Anyway, digressing again, but my aunt was just always into animals, always had dogs. And like I learned a lot about dogs through my aunt. Like she would tell me like dog stuff or like when they're sick, what's happening, like why are they eating grass? Why are they doing this? And of course, every vet or person that trains dogs has a different answer to that question. But yeah, it was just around a lot of dogs and definitely a lot of like fosters. So I got to play with a lot of dogs as a kid and I was really into that. So when I got to grad school and studying anthropology and I was like, whoa, like why is no one studying this dog aspect of human history? I like jumped at that and was like, let me do it. And I mentioned Brian Cummings, but I also want to shout out Dr. Angela Perri. She's a colleague of mine. She's like the dog black belt in dog archaeology, because she is American, but she went overseas to the UK, got a Marie Curie scholarship, worked at Max Planck, and does dog genetics. And in the last 10 years, genetics has really advanced archaeology and our understanding of the past. And she was like smart as hell and applied that to dogs. And I talked about this in the lecture, and I talked about this in a post the other day, but you can't study indigenous human remains here in the States. It's against the law. It's a federal thing called NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. And our scientists aren't allowed to examine, exhume, or like do any testing to indigenous remains. So it's hard to learn about the physiology of people back then, or like understanding what their isotopes are, which is essentially chemical registers in your bones that tell us what you were eating and things like that. So you can do that though through studying dogs, because if there were dogs at the site eating the same kind of stuff as the people, maybe eating their feces or just their trash, got a good glimpse of what dogs were eating, and that gets you a good glimpse of what people are eating. But she's a genius. I met her in Rome. I went to a conference called Dogs Past and Present, which was the first annual conference is what it was called, or the first annual, I think it was first annual conference. Hasn't happened again, so I guess it wasn't annual. But a friend of mine, Megan Dennison, who's a grad student studying dogs when I was in undergrad, told me about it, and I was like, well, I'm going, and my work paid for it, and I went, and I presented, wrote the presentation on the plane, and didn't think about my fonts not being on their computer. And I gave this presentation to an international audience of people, and they were all like super bright people from like Max Planck and Oxford. And I gave this presentation that had GIFs in it. It was lackluster, and all of the fonts were like spread out across the page because it didn't translate to their computer. And I speak broken Italian, and I was like I started like, because I do stand up, and I was trying to like, I was the first person to present. So I like was like, all right, I gotta, open the show here. And I just like started with a line in Italian, and no one laughed. It was bad. So I repeated it, and still no one laughed. And I literally, not facetiously, said, is this on? Because like I thought maybe they just didn't hear me. And the lady in Italian was like, we just didn't understand you, or in English, which was brutal. And then I gave the presentation, and it was essentially saying like, I'm really interested in dogs, and a lot of people are. And if you're watching this on the live stream, that people are in the chat here, you're probably interested in dogs or my facial hair, one or the other, or just me fucking up here. But yeah, I was saying that, and I was like, if all these dog papers are coming out in Nature and in archaeological sciences and antiquity and American antiquity, why don't we just make a large dog journal where like all of the cool dog archaeology and science and dog behavior studies get put? And I don't think that exists yet. It's probably on me to make that. I'm not going to do it, but trademark, if you want to do that, you let me know. Yeah. So I opened up that conference, and I'm the first paper in the book, and I was like, please, I don't have any research I don't want to publish in here. And they were like, well, you gave a paper, you got to do it. So I'm published somewhere. I forget where. It's all in Italian. Yeah. So, and I forgot, donde in Spanish is like where, and dove in Italian is like where, but I kept saying done. And I was like asking her where like the USB thing goes, and done just means like woman. So this lady was trying to help me put the stick into the computer. I kept going done, and she just, all she heard was me in an American accent going woman, and it was awkward. But that was my first international conference, and I was supposed to stay for all of it because it was 8 to 5 every day, but it was Rome, and I was like, well, I'm getting paid to be here. I'm going to go eat pizza. I'm going to eat some carbonara. I'm going to go see the Colosseum. But these American dudes outside the Colosseum were like, it's not worth it. So I didn't waste my money. I went to the Sistine Chapel. I went to the Vatican museums, which were spectacular. I went to the Capitoline Museum. That was amazing. I got a private photographer dude I met at the hotel who like took me around, or the Airbnb I was at, took me around Rome. He does like photography stuff. And like we just talked about photography and like showed me how to take pictures on my new camera and stuff. I think he wanted to bang me, but I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, it was fun. Got some pictures, took me on like a private tour of Rome. That was really cool. Digressing, a lot of the stuff in Rome, though, there were dog statues everywhere. And I talked about this in the lecture, and I'm sure if you've heard my podcast, you've heard me say this before, but there's dogs, like greyhound statues all over the place. It was a sign of like royalty, and it was a sign of wealth if you could afford like a greyhound from specifically Egypt, but I think there's Italian greyhounds too. So even back then, like Rome was like, high society back then. So a lot of people showed their wealth through dogs. And that's something where all the dog breeds that we know today are like so varied, and there's tiny teacup ones, there's big ones, there's ones that are very specialized. The Victorian era is where like a lot of those teacup breeds came from, and a lot of like those fancy, what you think of the kennel club kind of dogs. And that was like people showing their status through having these fancy dogs. And that's like kind of a more recent thing in history with dogs. And you can see that genetically and just through paintings, because if you look at Greece and Rome and China, there's dog paintings like everywhere. Mexico as well. Let's see. I'm going to take a pause here and look at the questions I've got, if anyone has asked any. I'll save them for the end. Do you think we will ever see a reconstruction of the Salish Bulldogs? People ask me about Salish Bulldogs constantly. I know nothing about them. I need to work on that. Maybe I'll do an episode on that where I can like in real time learn that and study it, because those are the ones where they use the dog's wool to make like clothing out of, right, and blankets and stuff. I would like to learn more about that myself. Let's see, I'm going to scroll a bit here. Do you study Neanderthals or humans, Neanderthal interactions? So I superficially know that, because you have to learn about Neanderthals and you have to learn about ancient humans in, the past. Like you have to take a paleoanthropology class, you have to take a bioanthropology class. So you do learn about like the different hominids and stuff. So I know about it. I just don't I would say like more than the average person, but that's not my focus. So I don't look it up every day and follow like the latest stuff. But yes, I do know quite a bit about that. I would say superficially. Someone has to see my feet. That's going to have to stop. No bad. Let's see. He has studied me in nature. I have. That man who said that taught me how to flint knap, by the way. And he made this shirt. Let's see. I'll go back to where I was going. You're published in my book. I'm in a book? Cool. I think I just talked about that. Cool. I don't see anything. Opinion on the Backerwall herding dog from northern India subcontinent. I have not heard about it. You drop me some stuff in the chat about that. We can talk about that later. Anyway, back to where I was going. So Angela Perri, I met her in Rome, and she was looking for jobs teaching somewhere, and I was going to end up getting my PhD with her as her student, like Jedi Padawan thing, but it didn't end up working out. I think she's at Texas A&M now, or she might not be. Anyway, anything that comes out by Dr. Angela Perri, check it out, because it's like top-notch dog archaeology and genetics. So how did I get here for the people listening? Like I said, I did hunter-gatherers and stone tools in grad school, and most of my papers had to do with dogs. That sound in the background is my dog chugging water like a camel, by the way, which camels evolved in the Americas and left to Asia. People didn't know that. Llamas are also camels. I learned that in school. So like my thesis, I talked about this last time, it's more fundable and just more doable, especially at a hunter-gatherer and Paleo-Indian school, to study lithics and stone tools. Lithics is the Greek word for stone tools. So I did that, but my term papers and stuff all had to do with dog research. So all of that, my linguistic paper, my cultural paper, my bio paper, and my archaeology paper actually didn't have to do with dogs, ironically. But all of that combined turned into my big lecture that I gave, and a lot of the lecture ones that I give here on Instagram. And my cultural one, I looked through a bunch of like indigenous myths, looking through, which ones mention dogs. And like the way you do this though, is you go to the library, and like the school library website, every university has this. And I just go to, this is kind of inductive reasoning, or deductive reasoning, I should say. We can do a whole episode on like doing research, but looked up dog plus indigenous plus ethnography plus, and I looked for like every instance of like indigenous ethnographies of indigenous people referencing dogs. And then you get the call number, tell a librarian, hey, I want to borrow this book. And if they don't have it, they order it, or they send you the PDF. And I did that. My dog is over there on the floor if you guys want to see him. What's up, bro? Let's see. So I did that, found all those books, and that became my term papers. And I did a lot of snooping around through like other university stuff, and I had friends send me things from other. Yeah, there's my dog. He's right there. What's up, bro? He's chilling. He doesn't like that there's a skull right here. Actually, he probably would like to chew on it, to be honest. Doesn't care if it's a dog. What would you consider my favorite dog breed? Definitely German Shepherds, hands down. I had a Beagle. I had a Brittany Spaniel, or like the Cocker Spaniel mix, whatever the hell she was. Then I had a Lab. I had many different retrievers in my life as a kid, like golden retrievers. And I would say Shepherds. It's just a different dog. It's a different animal. I would consider it different than a dog. It's a German Shepherd. It's much cooler to me, but I'll go back to any kind of dog for real. Cattle dogs, super smart. Think they're some of the smartest breeds. I've met many blue heelers since I've been out here out west where there's a lot of cattle dogs and incredibly intelligent dogs. They're also adorable to me. Before I lose topic of what I was doing, I did all those term papers. I made the dog lecture out of that, essentially. And let's see. That was linguistic. That turned into the lecture. And then when I left grad school, I ended up working for the Army Corps of Engineers through New South Associates, which is a archaeology firm in the South. And I was a collections manager, and I did collections management through all of grad school. That was like my job, which is essentially working behind the scenes in a museum or a collections management facility. And not to go too in the weeds on that, but anything excavated on private land is federally required to be housed in a federal facility and protected by whatever agency is doing it. So if it's the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, some of the state stuff, anything, they can pay to have a federal repository house that material and take care of it and like in a climate controlled facility and things like that. And I did that for the Army Corps. So anything that was excavated on Army Corps property, which is a lot of stuff to do with rivers and lakes and dams that the Army Corps runs, anything that did that in the South came into my jurisdiction at that lab. And I hired veterans the program's goal was to hire veterans to do that archaeological work, because that's the whole thing too. The guy who founded it did the mass grave excavations from Saddam Hussein in the first Gulf War. Then went over there after the second one and did a lot of excavations. And he testified against Saddam Hussein using archaeology to say like, hey, these people are shot in the back of the head and thrown into a ditch. And like, here's how you can tell using just basic archaeology, which is really cool. Unfortunate for them. That's not cool, but you know what I'm saying? And a lot of the soldiers he worked with were like, bro, what do I do when I get back? And he was like, I have an idea, because there's so many archaeological collections that need work. So we would hire vets to do that work, and didn't see any dogs come through my facility, which was boring, but a lot of bears. Cherokee had a lot of reverence for bears, and they harvested the bear fat and things like that. Bear fat is very good. I've had it recently. I actually haven't eaten bear before, but anyway, that was that job. But I would come home from work not being in grad school anymore. And in grad school, you're like, it's like whipped into you every day that like you have to be working on something. You have to be studying. You have to be working on this paper. You need to be doing research, or you need to be going to functions like through the department and stuff. And I would come home and like freak out that I had no homework. I had no paper. I had nothing to do. So you think alien species also have a similar relationship with the dog types? Absolutely. If there is a predator out there, like a cat or a dog type thing, it has definitely interacted with some intelligent, upright bipedal being like us, 100%. But yeah, you're totally speculative. I get you there. For the people listening, that was something coming up in the chat. So I'd come home and not have anything to do, and I couldn't just sit there and play video games. And I was in a new city. I didn't have any friends there yet. I had friends I could play with online and stuff and talk to and text, but like no one I knew. So rather than sit there and play video games all night, like after work, and then wake up and do the next thing or the same thing the next day, I ended up writing all this stuff down on Instagram, because I hadn't used Instagram too much before. And this was 2018. And that was when Instagram was all like writing, and I would just write out these nice posts, and it kind of gained, I don't want to say a following. It gained like popularity within like my academic community and that network and my other friends. And then because it was, dog related, just strangers popped in, and I did some in Spanish, which then I could target the ads and stuff to Mexico and Spain. And that brought in more people, which is how that whole thing came up. And it just grew and grew. And then in 2020, TikTok kind of popped off. And that's when I hopped onto TikTok and started doing like the skits and talking about dogs and stuff. And that blew up. I went 100,000 subscribers or followers on TikTok within like a few months, which was crazy. I wasn't used to that. I don't like using TikTok. I still don't. What I would do is read the posts from Instagram and do them in video format on TikTok. And then when Instagram started competing with TikTok to do more videos, that's when Instagram really took off for me, because I could do both formats. And then once I did that lecture in 2022, I spent the summer out here digging that Clovis site. And I would like post videos from that every day, and that just blew up. And then I gave that lecture, posted it. I gave it like November, edited and posted it in January. And that just had like 500,000 views on YouTube, I think more now, and blew up. I cut that into reels and I cut the lecture. I started editing the whole lecture into like cuts, like what would look good on Instagram, like quick little snippets. And then I put that into the entire lecture. Like it was all in order in the lecture, but tested it out on Instagram. And if a bunch of people were like, that's actually not wrong because of XYZ, I was then able in the lecture to put a note being like, actually, this is wrong. And I just completely misspoke and didn't know what I was talking about. So yeah, COVID really did it because I was just inside by myself through 2020, just like with nothing to do, and I just would post. And like I think a lot of us went a little nuts in social media in 2020, and it just like did really well. I remember doing one that was like about the George Floyd protests, like I talked about, you know, dogs and police dogs and the use in like the civil rights movement, and like, you know, how it wasn't great, and that like did numbers. So, and I felt weird profiting off that, but it was like also information that like it was relevant for me to post, and it was, you know, I think cool to discuss at that time, and that got like a lot of people either hating at me for it or like being like, hell yeah, do it, dude. And like that's stuff like that happens too. So you learn quickly, like half the people are going to hate what you post, the other half aren't, but either way it's going to make engagement, and then you get bigger. So there's a little tidbit there. Let's see, any other questions here? Are breeds a modern dog thing, or has it always been like that? I kind of talked about this in the beginning of the episode, but yes, the way we see breeds now is definitely more of a modern thing. Back then it was just like you had different dogs that did different things, or like the dogs in Egypt look like this versus the dogs in China. And like I'm sure people traded dogs for sure in Greece and Rome. Dogs were like a traded commodity, and I bet there's a genetic study on that. I can look into that. I know for a fact there's some in the Paleolithic. You can track dogs being traded across great distances. Is there a particular difference, I assume, shared between breeds and species? All dogs are the same species. They are Canis lupus familiaris, so a subspecies of the wolf. I think people used to classify them as different, and you could do like subspecies. You'd be like, this is Canis lupus familiaris Labrador if you wanted to, but gets into the weeds. And I talked about this last episode, and I'll dedicate a whole episode to this. Species is just a spectrum, and it's like a social construct that we apply to that spectrum with words. So it's like gets into the weeds. But yeah, that's how this kind of took off. And I know people listening now are probably like, well, why don't you just like talk about dog science and stuff like that? I will in the next 2 episodes. I just got to get these first 2 out. I wanted to say this so people can always go back and listen to the first 2 to understand like where this came from. But when I was starting in 2018, 2019, that's when Donnie Dust popped up, and he reached out to me and was like, dude, hell yeah, I love your stuff. And I was like, I love your stuff. We became good friends, worked together, like flew out and I'm so sorry. That was a big thing on this thing. I did a Life in Ruins podcast with my 2 colleagues, Connor John and then Carlton Gover. Carlton Gover has another podcast on the network called Plains Archaeology, Plains Anthropology, Plains Archaeology Podcast. There you go. He's Indigenous. He does Pawnee oral tradition, history, and archaeology. And we did a Life in Ruins together where we interviewed different researchers and grad students about their work and what they do. And I met Donnie Dust through that. We did a podcast with him. He was always like ahead of me in terms of like numbers and growth, and like just knew how to do this stuff. But he's always been a good mentor and like helping me grow with that. And like him and I have been like, dude, how do you deal with this? And he was like, I don't know, here's what I do. And through that, I also met Ettore Mazza, the guy who does all my artwork. And I had him do quite a bit of my art because I found him when I first started. I started posting like paleo art because I really liked different people that painted prehistory, you know, and I would reach out to the artists and be like, I love this picture. Can I use it for a post? And they were like, hell yeah. And I grew a network with that through different artists, and I linked them up. And that's how I met Ettore. And through Ettore, who does all my artwork, and he did the artwork for this podcast too, he was like, do you know Stefan Milo? Because he did Stefan's artwork. And I reached out to Stefan and was like, hey, I love your shit because this is what I've been trying to do. And he was like, your stuff's great too. Let's link up. And we did a video together, and here we are. Stefan's still a good friend. I just did a podcast with him on my other podcast. We'll see. I think I'm at 29 minutes. I think that's a full episode. I would love to talk more, but I'm going to have to cut that here. Are there any last questions I can answer here? Hello, Rusty Bones. You're killing it, David. Thank you, Lydia. Lydia Dorath, shout out, dude. She's a big fan, has bought some merch. You can get my merch on my website, davidianhowe.com, not to just sling you as a model, but davidhowe.com/store. You can get my the dog logo stuff, the hats, hoodies, whatever you want, artwork. But yeah, thank you, Lydia, for being a big supporter. She's very helpful and supportive. And you guys can also be supportive if you like and subscribe to this podcast. I'd love that on Spotify, iTunes, and here on YouTube. So on what is today? The 24th that I'm recording this. The podcast comes out the 28th on Saturday. So on the 28th, go to Spotify, go to Apple, click subscribe, and you'll get the podcast every week. Or if you want to listen to it ad-free, do it on the podcast. If you want to watch the video component with a few ads, you can watch it here on Instagram, YouTube, and I'll do these live streams here on Instagram when I'm doing ones like this where I can take questions and stuff from the audience. Heard you were considering a setup course. Yes, I'm setting up a course on dog anthropology, but I'll do a Anthro 101 course too, as soon as I can. I'm working on that right now. I promise. That's something in the background. Just got to get these episodes out. Please rate and review the podcast on Apple iTunes if you can. Please subscribe on Spotify. If you're on Stitcher, please do that there. And please like and subscribe here on YouTube. Every little bit counts. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Archaeology Podcast Network, all shows feed, or the feed here on YouTube. I'll put that link in the description. And yeah, thanks for listening. Next week, I will be talking about mammoths, which will be kind of fun. And then I'll get my friend Elise Cannon. She's History Doggos on Instagram. She's Australian. I say that because it's fun talking to her because I laugh at a lot of the stuff and she laughs at my shit. So I'll have her on. She does classical dog stuff, so that'll be really fun to talk about. And yeah, like and subscribe. Thank you. Thank you to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tristan. And that's it. Thank you.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.